introduce our guest today. R. Gopal Krishnan is the Executive Director of Tata Sons Limited. He is also the Chairman of Tata Autocom Systems Limited, Rallis India Limited, and Advinus Therapeutics Private Limited. Vice Chairman of Tata Chemicals and a Director of several Tata companies including Tata Motors and Tata Power. He also serves as an independent director on the boards of Indian subsidiary of Akzo Nobel and BP. He served Hindustan Lever Limited, now Hindustan Unilever Limited, for over 3 decades in various capacities, including chairman of Unilever Arabia, managing director of Brook Bond Lipton India, and vice chairman of Hindustan Lever Limited. Mr. Gopal Krishnan studied physics at Calcutta University and engineering at IIT. This is his formal introduction. We were just sitting in the green room and Mr. Biani and he were chatting along with Devdutt Patnaik, and Kishore said to Devdutt that I should tell you that one of the finest thought leaders that I have found in this community is Mr. Gopal Krishnan. So, I guess you would all know the format of this session. Is there any specific topic you want people to talk about, ask you questions on, or you are free for all? Yeah? He is a good tennis player because I play tennis with alongside on the next court because I don't play as well. So, I am going to hand it over to Gopal and all of you. You want to start here? Do you need the mic?
Hello. Sir, Parvez over here. Parvez over here. We had met very briefly in a Thai meeting in Bangalore. What I just wanted to ask, hello, yeah. What I wanted to ask you is, what is your advice on how small firms can go green without incurring the heavy expenses involved in going green?
How small firms can go green? Yeah. Green. But your second part of your question intrigues me. You said without incurring the heavy expenses of going green. Why is there a connection between the two? Just explain to me.
No.
Because if I can debunk the question, then the answer would have been given.
Well, there's a shortage of wafers in solar PV. The wind turbines cost a hell of a lot of money.
Oh, you mean that way?
Yeah.
I thought you meant how can they enter green businesses. I understand. See, I think it's a bit of a transitory period we are going through. If you look at the history of technology and entrepreneurship, in the early stages of that technology or that entrepreneur's life, things looked very expensive and out of hand, out of reach for him. As more and more people flocked into that field and demand picked up, prices came down. And I think this whole point about green technology is currently going through that phase because not enough people are demanding it. I would answer to your question as to what would you advise young entrepreneurs, I would say this, that don't think of green as a technology. Think of it as a state of mind, as an attitude. Just like you might think of honesty in business, it's a state of mind. You will find that there are many small little things that you can do without investing in big capital intensive, potentially price reducing things like wind turbines. Do those. As more and more people flock, because you have to contribute to the density of people who are flocking into that technology, the prices will come down, they'll certainly become affordable. That's the history of technology right through the years. So I'm not stating anything which is original or novel. But if you can get yourself into a mindset where you say that green is the way I want to go, you will do those things that are appropriate to your cost structure.
My name is
Sir,
Ashish, and
just
I
a
have
minute.
designed.
To follow up with that, could you give some examples of how Tata is doing it?
I'll come back to you. Let's finish.
Yeah. My name is Ashish, and I've designed a large education project. See, what's happening, I'm coming to my question in a minute. See, I've designed an education project, and I've looked at it very differently from what everybody is looking at it. See, what's happening in India today is a crane operator is making more money than an MA in economics.
Which operators?
A crane operator is making more money than an MA in economics. And therefore, nobody is going into teaching. Everybody is looking at the literacy aspect of it. So when I designed the school project, I had to design it large enough to create a huge migration of the best of minds to teaching. So I came up with this project to build 30,000 schools in India. And I found a way of financing them based on the principle of differential FSIs. Now,
based on what? Hold it closer to your mouth. Hold it closer.
Yeah, it's based on the principle of differential FSIs. Now see, the public sector undertakings in India hold a huge amount of land in various cities. So what I've done is I've increased the FSI of all PSUs in the project from a current level of 2.33 to 15. Now to ensure that the investors, private holders in these PSUs don't create problems, I've said that let's give 5 FSI to the PSUs.
I didn't get the last.
An FSI of 5 to the PSUs, so that they can auction that FSI from 2 point whatever differential from 2.33 to 5, and then the balance 10 FSI can be put into an SPV that is set up by the government of India under an act of parliament. So it raises something like 93 billion US dollars to make create a transition. What it does is it creates a lifestyle around the teaching profession and creates beautiful campuses with architecture from Auroville and all these places. Now, it's also India's largest IT project. I'm having a lot of difficulty in actually promoting this within government, and I want to know how I should go about it to ensure that this thing gets through, because I have solved both the problems of getting the best people into education and getting the money. Now this doesn't require any funding from government of India except setting up 56 pilot projects. I would like some advice on that.
Ashish, you said, is the name?
Yeah.
May I be frank?
Yes.
You want me to be frank? You have set yourself to sell an idea which is not saleable. Maybe. So you can keep your original intent and idea and see if you can re-engineer it so that it becomes saleable. To be something to be saleable must have first credibility. If you say that I can raise $93 billion just by doing a real estate trade, then you've automatically given the whole project a different angle. And that is probably the reason why people are hesitant to accept your proposal is they are wondering whether there is some other agenda that you have. I know you don't, but I must tell you, you asked me what is it that I can do. What you're really saying is there's a lot of FSI. If I sell that FSI, I can get money. With the money, I can get teachers. Yes, that's the way I understood you. Sorry if I got it wrong. If it's wrong, then please correct me. The way you said it is, take all the PSUs, jack up their FSI by 7 times and raise the money out of it. And out of that money, promote education. If I misunderstood you, you may repeat your question.
See, this land is going to be invested in a corporation called the Indian Social Infrastructure Corporation. It will be created under an act of parliament. Now, it's not also right that a lot of people are not receptive to it. I've just found 2 or 3 supporters. One of them is Arun Shourie, who really liked the scheme, and he said that he was thinking of introducing something in parliament, saying that let's create this corporation. So I feel it is workable, because once it gets into, you have a corporation that like the Highways Authority of India, they are doing something similar. I don't see what's the problem in actually, and see, the entire thing is not by paying money. I'm wanting to create a lifestyle around the teaching profession by using the architecture of Auroville to create beautiful campuses, teachers, housing and things like that. This whole thing about literacy is a completely wrong notion of by giving people a midday meal scheme, you can get somebody to attend a class. It doesn't make people more, it doesn't get literacy into the system. You got to for thousands of years, the teacher fraternity has been at the center of the education system. Unless we get teachers, create a mass migration now in many companies. I work for Reliance. Actually, I'm a project designer at Reliance Industries. And that's how I've thought about this, and it got some traction also within the firm. But I design energy projects mainly. But this is my first attempt at education. Let's see. I mean, I hope I've understood what you're saying. So we'll probably.
My name is Shailesh Mehta. You mentioned about creating a huge infrastructure for schooling, and I think the time has come that shall we think of putting up tens of thousands of schools and colleges, or we use technology for the purpose. The fact is, the traditional system, which we have been since the Ramayana days and the Gurukul days, I think it is bedeviled by a lot of problems, apart from the investment that is required, the faculty shortage that is there. And it is not really very friendly in the sense the student, if he is absent for one day also, he misses the link, and then, he's out of the school. I like to give some example. My son was in one school, and coaching class, for example, and he was attending some good faculty. And he attended this class for 2-3 sessions, and then he said that, why are you attending, because the faculty is good. And then he was thrown out of their system, Then I was meeting another friend. Now, his friend's son is very short, Now, the system in the class is that you have to rotate. Now, he observed that when he's sitting in the front bench, his performance is good. And if he's sitting in the last bench, performance is bad. You can understand, A lot of people, like even I had the spectacle, but I was not wearing it. And then sitting in the last bench, you really couldn't see anything. Now, all these kinds of problems that are there, I think the solution to our problem in education, is focused on, using technology. With technology, we can use, a few teachers, good teachers, so that, you can replicate it. You can also provide really good pedagogical experience, You can also provide live support. And today, what is also happening is that, see, let us face it, India is a country with a lot of disturbances, social disturbances, and it's going to be there. And apart from the poor infrastructure. Now, like we had a teacher strike, recently. It lasted for about 10-15 days. Now, after the teacher strike, the students were called for Saturday, Sundays, and then, teacher was running too fast, and the students were not really able to make it. Now, these things really do not happen, in the technology. You can have the syllabus completion can be taken care by the technology, and teacher role will come as a value addition, can provide, additional help to the weak student, even additional help to bright students so that they can move up, can present live case studies and all that. So I see that, we are also coming from the technology background, my company is. So we are seeing that, the adoption is not to the desired extent, although the benefits are all there, I just would like to have your comments.
No, I think what you state is unexceptionable, that our education system is outmoded. It doesn't have the human touch of nurturing, which is supposed to have. That technology can help. These are the 3 points that I've heard you're making. And if you ask me my comments, I have to only agree with you. Okay? It would be foolish to disagree, actually. How can you disagree with that?
Sir, I'm Gautam Ustwal.
Go, sir.
I'm Gautam Ustwal. We would like to learn from you your success story, and we can follow it. So can you guide us from small to grow larger? What is step we should take it, and what do you advise us?
How do you grow from being small to larger? Is that your question?
Yeah. And we wanted your success story. What do you advise us? What one should have the qualities?
Politics.
What one should have the quality?
Qualities. What's the nature of your business, if I may ask, so that I try to be relevant?
I'm a pharma manufacturer and exporter. Pharmaceutical manufacturer and exporter.
I don't know if anybody has, I certainly cannot pass off as an example of a guy who started something, because I've always been in the corporate sector. So to that extent, what I have to tell you may or may not, but as a person who's observing the scene and seeing companies that have been grown up, you need two parts to this whole success, as I can see. First is not in your control. You can call it luck, you can call it God, you can call it a break, you can call it what you want, but there is some factors which are not in your control. Let me take an example. Today we eulogize all the software companies as though they are God's gift to mankind. 15 years ago, barring one or two, most of them were unknown. Nobody predicted that something called Y2K will happen. But when Y2K happened, it became like swine flu. People didn't understand what it is, but they were prepared to take the injection required to prevent that swine flu happening. So the software industry got a huge amount of offshoring business, and that put it into the billions leagues when they were not even counting in the millions. That's what I mean by saying it's the most visible example of things that you don't design. If they happen to you, good things happen. Come back to the part that is in your control, what it is that you can do. I think what I would like to say, though I know it's very difficult for new entrepreneurs to implement this, is if you found your business on a sound ethical basis and a sound customer basis, you will have nowhere else to go except upwards. That's the first rule. If you ask me, listen, there's so much corruption all over the place, it's easy for you to say it sitting on the dais. I will sympathize with you, but still I would say my point. The second thing is, entrepreneurs have the habit of comparing themselves with other entrepreneurs. If they are going up like this, but the neighbor is going like this, they get unhappy. It's a bit of human nature. It happens to managers in their career. It happens to tennis or sportsmen in their careers. But an entrepreneur has to understand whether he's really climbing the mountain, and if somebody else is flying faster because his good luck has come, don't get worried about it. I think if you follow these two principles and you build a sound customer base and get the shape of your business right, the management books will all tell you that large companies do investments, which is a polite way of saying they're making losses, because the goodies will happen 5 years from now. That doesn't work for an entrepreneur. You have to get cash flows. What in Gujarati you say, rokda paisa has to be there. Otherwise you can't run your business. That's what I mean by the shape of the business. Then I think you probably have a good start. When hopefully you'll progress.
Hi, I'm Santosh, founder and director of Institute of Corporate Professionals. With what's going on and which we just finished in Copenhagen, what do you think Indian entrepreneurs and businesses, how they will ensure their CSR strategy for environment is such that we meet both growth as well as green aspects of international expectations, like 10, 20 years down the line. Recently, the National Geographic magazine, they've come up with the fact that if rest of the world consumes the way Americans consume, we need 5 times Earth's resources. And if we consume the way Indians consume, we need 1.4 Earth resources. So with these kind of issues and still the need for growth and economic prosperity, how do you think India Inc. will participate both in green aspects as well as the growth aspects?
When you say how will India Inc., do you mean small enterprise or large enterprise?
All business sector, complete businesses, right from SMEs to conglomerates.
You know, let me respond to you by stating that if India has one outstanding, unique, differentiating strength, which is so distinctive that you can just smell it, it is entrepreneurship. I can't think of any other country anywhere in the world other than America where the huge diversity and the very history and the evolution of the population makes them entrepreneurial. And I'm defining entrepreneurial as people who are seeking out new opportunities where none is visible. So you have to think back, for our whole history this has happened. Whatever else people may say about green and white and ecology and so on, we should never let that instinct suffer. Because that's something that's in your genes. It is something that you have inherited from your ancestors. So that's my overarching statement. That if your question is, with all these conditions that are being put with green and climate change and so on, how should entrepreneurs respond to that? Have I understood your question correctly? And here's what I would say. It is most essential that you create an ethical business which you can grow systematically according to your plans and a bit of luck. It is highly desirable that you should try to follow and embrace as many green practices as you can, provided your business can afford it. I don't believe so much the argument that is being offered in places like Copenhagen, because sometimes some of them are so stretched that I wonder whether they are really done to suppress the entrepreneurship of some of the emerging countries. I'm a bit of a agnostic in this respect. And I would strongly urge, particularly because I am in a tie event here, that put your entrepreneurship first and your green second, not the other way around. Get your priorities right.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Ajay Agarwal. I'm here.
Where are you?
I am also running a small NGO because I believe that in India, the quality practices are only followed at the workplaces. The companies spend a lot of money in training their employees, in following quality practices to get the best out of them. But the quality, those same employees do not carry those quality practices in their personal and social life. And I think that is why there is such a big divide between India and the Western countries. That's my belief. And I also believe that if companies like groups like Tata and large companies today who have CSR budgets, instead of using that money outside their company, if they start using the same budgets, enable their employees to carry quality home and change their lives and make them responsible citizens, do you think something like that can work?
I'm going to repeat your question just to make sure I'm answering the right question. Instead of spending money on external CSR, if you divert that money to an internal education and rewiring of the attitudes of your own employees, would you not achieve more?
Yeah, because you are now having more responsible employees. You will be proud of having that, you know, these are my people, employees who are more responsible towards society and they are more.
I can only express a personal view. I think Tata's is wonderful, it is large, it is long-standing, but I don't think it is that influential as you might have in your mind. We employ 300,000 people. And of the 300,000 people, say 200,000 people or 220,000 are in India. Out of the 220,000 people, 120,000 people are people like you and me. They are engineers, accountants, lawyers, doctors. They are as responsible or irresponsible as you and I. The so-called people who need education and carry their attitudes, if you go by education and their status in the organization, are only 100,000. And if I multiply that by an average family size of 5, our influence can reach 500,000 people. Whereas if you use the money for doing what we are doing, it might touch a few more. So it's a close call. We, irrespective of our CSR budgets which are spent outside, we do try to do what you just said. For example, you take safety. But there are practical issues. When our people, even whether contractors, workers, or our own workers, are involved and we insist that they should wear their harnesses, safety harnesses, their helmets, you know, at the place of work. He says, I'll do it because that's your law, that's your rules. But when I take off all this and I go and get into the suburban train, I'm going to be hanging out of that train for 1 hour till I reach Dombivli or wherever. There's nothing you can do about that.
Hi, I'm Somil Mehta. I'm a student of engineering. My question is, what kind of business opportunities are there in the environmental sector? And is it scalable? Can you make it profitable? Is it viable, basically,
I'm amazed at the amount of concern or interest about the environmental side. That's the third question on the environment and green. Is this a new thing? Huh? In earlier TIE seminars also did this happen? I don't think so. It's quite amazing. Obviously the intellectual appeal of this has spread to the entrepreneurs. If I could just rattle off 5 things that entrepreneurs could do, then it would already be in the public domain. What I can say is this, that the environmental area is ripe for entrepreneurs who are knowledge-based. You know, how do you bring down the price of cells? How do you develop the algae to do biodiesel? How do you develop an enzyme to deal with vegetable oil to convert it into diesel? to convert vegetable oil into ethanol. These are questions which really only science can address. And there are a lot of early start companies in the US which are working on this, and we constantly get inquiries from them. Most of the environmental things are now hazy, and it depends on the attitude of the entrepreneur. Some entrepreneurs get very attracted when things are hazy, because that's when they can find a space under the sun. And some people get put off by it. If you're the former type, and true entrepreneurs really like hazy situations, because that's when they can go and make a place, and you have a little background in the science of these, then I think it will be self-evident as to what these are.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
So this,
The lady, somebody at the back?
yeah. This is Kiran Shaiva from Empower.
Hold it closer to your mouth.
This is Kiran Shaiva from Empower. We promote basically NGO and women and green producers in the corporate places based on sustainability and diversity of suppliers. I just wanted to ask, because you know the Tata Group is so well known in the for the policies and the initiatives that they do, that if you perhaps showcase them a little bit more publicly, you think other organizations might look at doing this a lot more seriously? Because you don't hear too much unless you research.
Showcase what we are doing in terms of environment and green?
As well as social initiatives that you do, which are based on sustainability and diversity, not just CSR.
I don't know whether we do enough of it. If you say we are not doing enough of it, I will accept that as a point.
No, I said you do so much of it, but it is really known outside the circles.
No, you're saying you don't showcase enough of it.
Yes.
Well, if you have any ideas, if you can become our entrepreneurial showcaser,
Done, sir. Done. Thank you.
maybe you can make a business out of it. We don't know how to do it.
Very good afternoon. I'm coming from a company which is, I think, the only one in India right now who's operating for raising funds for development sector through CSR portfolio management services, and we are a for-profit company working for the non-profit in India. Needless to say, Tata's, we have worked for 2-3 projects with Tata's in certain rural districts of India, and raising funds in the development sector through NGOs and other trusts and everything. Now, my question is very specific, that since we don't have somebody to follow, since we are setting the guidelines ourselves in this industry, I wanted to know why, except Tata's, 70% of the companies which have a relatively larger CSR portfolio are quite hesitant to allocate the same within one given fiscal.
Within
one fiscal.
Fiscal.
Yeah. So they're always interested in carrying it forward to the next year, giving one more reason for it to get abandoned, and the project halfway has to commit suicide, and that becomes a problem. So if you can throw some light as to why does this kind of an approach exist other than the Tatas? Tatas are okay, they have funded a lot of projects like that, but other than Tata, 70% of the people actually are quite hesitant to fund projects, change of direction of the board, and suddenly they'll collapse. So why this lack of responsibility even to allocate CSR portfolios is a part of it?
This is a very difficult question to answer. You're saying what you know, you don't please explain to me. Now I want to ask you a question on what you do not know. Why other people are doing something else? How do I answer that?
Your assessment of the situation. Since you are an experienced person in this corporate scenario, your assessment of the situation.
I'll use a metaphor, and I'm going to be guessing. As you said, your assessment, your judgment, I could be wrong. Some people, like us, earn money to look after their family, and if anything is left over, they may mentally allocate X rupees a month for other people. And when my son or my daughter is getting married or going to school, in that month I may tell that person, I can't help you this month with your school fees or whatever I'm doing, because my quota has come down. There are some other people, and we know of them, they are much greater people than many of us sitting in this room, who say, I'm earning my money to share it with my family. It may be their extended family, it may be their village, it may be whatever. And I will treat all of them equally. They become very famous people, but many common people who are not so well known also do that. They are two different kinds of people. Most of the people belong to the first category. As far as Tatas are concerned, I can only say this, that the founder said that the very purpose of my running the business is to serve the community. So he was of that second category. He said, whatever I get, this is my community, I'm going to share it with them. Don't know if that answers your question, but it's a point of view.
That's all that I wanted to see.
So my name is Badresh Padia, and I want to ask you about this new emerging scenario of water. You know, water.
Water.
There's going to be a challenge for the water as a society, and there is a reality to water that we have as a civil society to water. Now, we consume a lot of water for our domestic purpose. We consume our water for our agro purpose. We consume water for the industrial purpose. And we all, the way the population is, the people on this planet is growing, and the need of water is growing, we are heading for challenge there, big challenge. What role entrepreneurs have, startup entrepreneurs or knowledge-based entrepreneurs, to shift some paradigm, let's say in industrial water or domestic water or the agrochemical water. I liked your views. How does one, as an entrepreneur, serve this water domain, specifically to begin with industrial water, and more knowledge-based way rather than end of the pipe?
Well, that's a very good question, because you touched something which I'm particularly interested in. The whole area of water. You can apply the same to air. You can apply the same to land, and there are many other things. And I do believe that these are areas where entrepreneurs can play a role. I think entrepreneurs who are interested in this area will find that there are 3 or 4 strategies that are, broadly speaking, available. One is the conservation of water, which means how to reduce the amount of water that is wasted, either by leaking pipes or joints and so on and so forth. That's conservation. The second is fundamentally reduce the usage of water. If I'm using 15 liters per head per day for my bath and other purposes, how can that be 13 or 12? So that's the second area of application of knowledge and technology. The third is how to render the water more suitable for the purpose for which, if it's for drinking, or it is for irrigation, or is it for flushing. That's the third route. And the fourth route is recycling. How can water, which has been used for its purpose, not just flow off somewhere else? Probably you can add 3 or 4 more. In each of these, I think there are retail level technologies that people are working on. Obviously, time doesn't allow to go into each of these. If I take the example of what Tatas have just launched called Tata Swachh, it is based on very natural materials. I mean, rice husk has been in this country since our ancestors' times. But the insight that rice husk composition, done in a certain particular way of processing, can achieve what many more complex things are doing without the addition of chemicals, is an insight that came out of one individual. He didn't become an entrepreneur, he was a professor. He joined Tata's. With that idea, we added the rest of the resources and worked on this. So I think it's a very, very potent area. Here's a challenge for you. The air that we breathe will continue to get more and more polluted, even in the villages one of these days. If somebody can design a filter just before the air is delivered into your nose, which clears it of the bad things, most of the bad things, you got a big business ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. I'm Harish Gupta. I have a question on HR. It has in 2 parts. You have been working with one of the biggest multinational companies in the world, and you shifted to a professionally managed, family-owned company. What were the issues in terms of you getting adjusted in the new environment, and how did you solve this? That is question number 1. Question number 2 is that, again related with the HR. Well, you can choose to answer or not. The second one. recently Mr. Tata had made a statement that the new chairman of the group will be from outside. So did it affect the morale of the Tata Group top management?
Shall I answer the second one first? Since you told me that you said you can choose not to answer it, I can choose not to answer the first one also. When I was very young, I had a Hindi teacher. And Hindi is not my native language, I don't speak Hindi at home. So I had to make very special efforts to learn Hindi. And one of the stories he told us in the class, he said, देखो बेटा, राजधानी और राजकुमारी, ये दो चीज़ें हैं जिस पे कभी सिटीजन को नज़र नहीं रखना चाहिए. There is no Rajkumari in Tata, but there is a Rajdhani, मैं उस पर नज़र नहीं रखता हूँ. Okay? So that answers your second question. The question of my morale doesn't arise. If tomorrow Dr. Manmohan Singh is not the Prime Minister, मैं वहाँ तक नज़र भी नहीं पहुँचता है. So I don't worry about it. Okay? On your first question, I can give you a long, complicated answer, but that would not be helpful. If you can tell me why you want to know, because it is true that Hindustan Lever is India's most multinational company. And I would hesitate to call Tata as a professionally managed family business. I would call it India's most multinational Indian company. So you just flip the two words, Indian multinational, multinational Indian, and you get the two companies. Both are very professional. My greatest satisfaction is for 42 years, they have both been, at least my experience, both of them have been fantastically ethical. There are differences, just like any two human beings have differences. It's probably not worth the time to go into that now.
Hi, sir. Hi, sir. My name is Ashwin Joshi. I'm a management student. I know that you started at HUL from Pune, but I just wanted to know how you went about the journey and what are the competencies that served you well in that tenure. And I also wanted to know that Tatas are not known for their marketing, traditionally not known for their marketing, and HUL as much as HUL is. So how did you make the transition into Tatas from HUL? Thank you.
Again, I will try to be brief because this can be a long question. And when you reach my age, you have this tendency to look wistfully into the air and start recounting your last 42 years. Everybody will run away from here. So I'll try to be brief about it. You were saying, just give us one or two things that you learned from your career, correct? That's really your question. I'd only say this, just to put it differently, hopefully a different perspective. So you said you're a student of management. Management institutes teach you what can be taught. Your real education begins after you leave the management institute, because your best lessons in life are learned by things that cannot be taught. When you are in a junior level, in the first 10-15 years of your career, you are rewarded by your bosses for being analytical, for being rational, and for being decisive, and for reducing ambiguity into clarity. In the last 15 years of your career, assuming it's a 30-year career, you will not be rewarded for this, you'll be penalized for this. You'll be rewarded for coping with ambiguity, for not thinking rationally, but thinking with your right brain, thinking holistically. It is your ability to convert and cross that river without getting drowned in it that makes the difference between a good junior manager and a good senior manager.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to end the session. So on everyone's behalf here, would you please join giving him a big applause for being here with us. Thank you, Gopal. And as a matter of, and a token of appreciation, here's a letter of donation on your behalf to the midday meal scheme. Nothing. It's just acknowledgement that we actually gave it.
Somebody is objecting to the midday meal scheme. Who is that?
Okay, we'll settle that later.